Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo in Quito, Ecuador, and this is From the South. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Bachelette, has called for the easing of sanctions in order to enable medical systems to fight COVID-19 and limit global contagion. The High Commissioner said that broad sectoral sanctions should urgently be reevaluated in countries facing the coronavirus pandemic in light of their potentially debilitating impact on the health sector and human rights. Bachelette cited the sanctioned countries of Iran, Cuba, DPRK, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe. She also emphasized that the impact of sectoral sanctions on access to essential medicines and medical equipment, including respirators and protective equipment for healthcare workers, has had effects on Iran. During the second week of quarantine, the government of Venezuela strengthened measures to prevent the increase of infections. Venezuelan and Cuban doctors are visiting neighborhoods to detect new cases, isolate suspected infections, and stop this disease from spreading.
Cuban and Venezuelan doctors leave the health centers known as the CDI of the Barrio Adentro mission in search of possible cases of coronavirus, visiting people from home to home in order to avoid what has happened in other countries.
We are visiting patients that don't want to go to health centers because they are afraid or for other reasons. This way, we can prevent the transmission of this disease.
Cutting the transmission and preventing the collapse of the healthcare system is a great challenge. The inspections are among the measures announced by President Nicolas Maduro to prevent the coronavirus in the second week of quarantine. The doctors don't stop. They work all day in order to locate possible cases. Everyone they run into on the streets is questioned. The coronavirus must be stopped at all costs, and the people need to be informed. The doctors follow a route which was laid out by a massive survey which was conducted through the Carnet de la Patria system, in which the majority of Venezuelans are registered. Over 12 million Venezuelans have filled out an online survey through which they could diagnose themselves. This made it easier to identify a first group of around 21,000 suspected cases to be inspected. 2 women, one from Panama and another from the U.S., were already isolated. Their tests and treatments are totally free.
It takes around 24 to 48 hours to process the sample. Meanwhile, you will remain isolated and follow preventive measures to protect other people around you. Wear a mask and wash your hands frequently. We will treat you depending on the symptoms, meaning that if you have a fever, we will give you something for that.
This country is the best prepared for this because the president has taken appropriate actions. The doctors came to my house. I told them about the symptoms I had and that I was abroad, and then they came to look for me.
In the meantime, applause motivates Venezuelans to continue strictly following the quarantine.
In Italy, an emergency field hospital has been inaugurated in Crema, where members of the Cuban Medical Brigade will provide support to local hospitals. The brigade includes both doctors and nurses arrived in Italy on the weekends to help contain the spread of the coronavirus and treat patients. Present at today's inauguration were local authorities and regional officials of Lombardy, the hardest hit part of the country. Cuba is also sending a medical brigade to help fight against COVID in Dominica. Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit took to Facebook to express his gratitude. The brigade consists of 25 nurses, 5 doctors, and 4 lab technicians and will arrive on Thursday. The Association of Caribbean States is hosting the first extraordinary meeting of Ministers of Foreign Affairs and the Health Association of Caribbean States on COVID-19. Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez is among the participants of the video conference. He said that the rapid spread of the disease requires uniting wills to develop joint actions of cooperation, and that the moment calls for setting aside political differences to focus on facing the emergency. The Dutch cruise ship Sangdam with over 1,800 passengers aboard, has been allowed to dock in Chile for 2 days. However, only 10 people, 8 Chileans and 2 French passengers with high-risk chronic disease were allowed to disembark, as there are at least 42 people on board presenting flu-like symptoms. There are no COVID-19 testing kits in the ship. The crew has said they are hoping to dock in Florida in the United States after no countries along the coast of Latin America have given it permission to disembark their passengers in their ports. The president of Mexico is set to sign a decree that allows senior citizens to stay at home with paid leave to mitigate the impact of the coronavirus pandemic.
I will be signing a decree so that both in public and private sectors, senior citizens are given permission to stay at home, with paid leave and with all benefits.
Over the past days, people across Brazil have been expressing their dissatisfaction with the far-right government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic by banging pots and pans from their windows. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian Muir, has more.
For the last 7 nights in a row, every night during the national news broadcast on global television, thousands and thousands of people in cities across Brazil come out onto their balconies and bang pots and pans, mainly in the middle-class neighborhoods. Now, this is a traditional middle-class form of protest in Brazil. During the parliamentary coup against President Dilma Rousseff in 2016, there were similar protests in middle-class neighborhoods calling for the ouster of Dilma Rousseff. So what this means is that the traditionally conservative Brazilian middle class has turned on President Jair Bolsonaro. And the reason for that is his horrible mishandling of the coronavirus crisis. Instead of making any decisive decisions or showing any kind of leadership, he initially denied that it was a problem. He's passed it on to a bunch of people in his entourage. One of his own drivers was hospitalized with respiratory conditions today because of coronavirus. And he's deliberately fighting against governors who are trying to take the steps needed to guarantee that the curve at least gets somewhat flattened out. For example, when governors in Rio and Sao Paulo announced they were closing the airports, Bolsonaro tried to reopen them. So this is why there's a growing consensus around the world, even in conservative sectors, even in the business community, even organizations like the Eurasia Group, that the Bolsonaro administration is providing the world's worst response to the coronavirus crisis, and there's a major human rights tragedy coming down the path here.
We thank Brian Muir for that report. More stories coming up. Don't go away.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Libya's UN-recognized Government of National Accord has reported the first case of the novel coronavirus in the war-torn nation.
We report on this day, March 24, 2020, a first contamination with the coronavirus in Libya. We insist all citizens abide by the necessary measures instructed by the Ministry of Health and National Center for Disease Control.
The president of the Democratic Republic of Congo has declared a state of emergency and ordered the isolation of Kinshasa to avoid the spread of the novel coronavirus. The country has so far registered 45 cases of the virus, including 3 fatalities, all in Kinshasa.
In view of the seriousness and the dangerous nature of the situation, I am declaring a state of emergency, taking into account the security situation that currently prevails in our country in relation to coronavirus pandemic. I have decided to take the following additional measures, which are of immediate application: prohibition of all travel from Kinshasa to the provinces, and from the provinces to Kinshasa, in order to allow the containment of the city, the source of the pandemic.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has announced that the nation's 1.3 billion citizens will go under total lockdown for 21 days to combat the spread of the pandemic.
Please listen carefully. From 12 midnight today, the entire country will go under a complete lockdown. To save India, every Indian, and to save you and your family, from midnight tonight, there will be a total ban on venturing out of your homes.
And following the Prime Minister's announcement, anxious citizens raced to gather essential goods before emptying the normally overcrowded roads. Many shelves in New Delhi and Mumbai were stripped bare as the world's second most populous country rushed into a shutdown. Some citizens have even reportedly been stranded outside their villages due to the immediate implementation of the lockdown.
The day the curfew was implemented, I thought I could wait for a day and then we will be allowed. But then, after 3 or 4 days of no food, I had to just leave my truck behind and run. If I am able to find a way to go to my village, it's good. Otherwise, I will have to walk. I don't think there's any other way.
The Ministry of Endowment and Religious Affairs in the occupied Gaza Strip has ordered the closure of all mosques for a period of 2 weeks as a preventive measure to curb the spread of the pandemic. The number of Palestinians infected with COVID-19 has so far reached 60, with 58 at the West Bank and 2 in the Gaza Strip.
This is a very sad thing. The houses of God are empty of worshippers. The greatest thing is praying in this time at the mosque. The government and the Ministry of Endowments issued a decision telling people to pray at home, to protect them and their children from this pandemic.
After confirming its first case of COVID-19, Syria has taken preventive measures to stop the spread of the disease. More details in this report.
A young Syrian woman who had just arrived from abroad was the first case to test positive for COVID-19. Strict medical controls implemented in the borders allowed for the quick detection, but Damascus says that the US and European blockade will hurt preventive measures against the novel coronavirus.
Recently, we marked 9 years of war, a war that affects all sectors of life, including health, which greatly suffers the consequences of the blockade. We denounce how it limits our capacity to face this pandemic because it exacerbates our lack of resources. It makes our jobs harder and worsens the situation.
Immediately after confirming the case, Syrian authorities announced the closure of Syria's borders with Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. Public transportation was also suspended in cities and provinces, and the production of all printed media was halted until further notice.
We support the measures adopted, especially in markets and border areas, and the suspension of public transportation. Let's hope that this strategy helps contain the spread of the virus.
A general amnesty declared by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is part of one of the many preventive measures that also include the closure of markets and shopping centers. Work was also suspended in public institutions in order to avoid mass gatherings, as well as all services in churches and mosques.
within the framework of establishing preventive measures to protect citizens in this pandemic. We think that the measures are appropriate. We hope citizens comply fully in order to safeguard our country.
While sterilization and disinfection campaigns continue in all provinces of the country, citizens have adhered to recommendations and started to self-isolate.
We're taking one last break, but stay with us.
A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en la I.
Dotting the I. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Chinese authorities have announced they will end a 2-month lockdown in most areas of Hubei province, including the city of Wuhan, the epicenter of the global pandemic.
From midnight on April 8, Wuhan will lift the control measures for passages from the city of Wuhan and Hubei province and orderly restore external traffic. The personnel departing Wuhan will move safely and orderly with the Hubei Health Green Code. From midnight on March 25, the control of the exit passageways from Hubei province out of Wuhan will be lifted, and external traffic will be restored in an orderly manner.
And in the city of Wuhan, life is gradually going back to normal, with people allowed to walk out of their homes to shop for necessities and businesses slowly coming back to life. More than 6,000 residential neighborhoods have been verified as epidemic-free, and their residents are being allowed to go out. Major automobile plants have also partially resumed operation as the epidemic is abating. The origin of the novel coronavirus has quickly turned from a strictly scientific question into renewed tensions between the United States and China.
U.S. President Donald Trump continues to call the novel coronavirus the Chinese virus, ignoring any criticism of his racist rhetoric. Chinese officials also point out that labeling the virus as such will only increase tensions between both two countries and encourage xenophobia against Asians.
Coronaviruses are a global phenomenon. They exist on a global basis. It's an unlucky accident of history or nature that they emerge in a certain place. And it's really important that we don't start to ascribe blame to geographic origin, and that we look at this in terms of how we respond, how we contain, and how we stop this virus.
Although the novel coronavirus was first reported in the Chinese city of Wuhan, scientists say the real question is not its geographical origin, but which animal species was the original host of the virus.
The pandemic broke out in Wuhan, China, but it doesn't mean that the disease originated from Wuhan. We have no evidence to back up this up. This is a scientific problem.
Many conspiracy theories have come to life since the start of the pandemic in January 2020. But a recent research published in a prestigious scientific journal seems to confirm that the new virus is not laboratory-made or purposely manipulated.
It is evident that President Trump, like Western media, have made an effort to present COVID-19 as a Chinese virus, even though there is still no conclusive proof of its origin. Ironically, while China has done everything to find out the origin and characteristics of the novel coronavirus, the United States refuses to collaborate with these research projects and reveal any of their own findings about the virus.
After containing the pandemic in record time, China now leads an international aid campaign, providing medical supplies, sending expert teams, and sharing its scientific knowledge about the virus to countries around the world.
China has been transparent about its research progress on the virus, while the United States hinders the possibility of international cooperation. While China and Cuba are sending aid to the countries most affected by COVID-19, the United States is leading a campaign against China with misinformation and the use of xenophobic terms. All of this while maintaining sanctions against countries like Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela, contributing to a major humanitarian crisis.
As the COVID-19 pandemic paralyzes the world and the death toll closes in on 20,000, research into the original animal host of the virus continues. Identifying the original host species will not only help in the prevention of future zoonotic outbreaks, but will also help the development of an effective vaccine.
In the latest effort by the U.S. Federal Reserve to prevent a recession, authorities implemented the unlimited purchasing of bonds to help markets. To ease the fears of investors, the Fed will now be able to purchase U.S. Treasuries at agency mortgage-backed securities with no limit to hopefully curb job and income losses. But experts say this measure may not be enough since Congress has continued to stall over a stimulus package for businesses. Our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Jorge Gestoso, has more.
Thank you. The coronavirus still a big threat in the U.S. It's growing exponentially. We're talking that it's getting closer to 50,000 cases proven and over 600 deaths at this very moment. Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York, where is the largest cases in the country, mentions that it duplicates the amount of cases every 3 days, and he says that most definitely there is a crisis. He said, before you could think that there was a freight train. No, this is a bullet train that is coming against us, and most definitely the country is still not equipped or unequipped to face this type of crisis. He said that they need ventilators, they still need masks, they still need gowns, and they still need a lot of hospital beds. The convention center in New York City, the Jake Jock Habits, has been transformed in an emergency hospital and is going to be including about 1,000 beds in order to treat coronavirus cases. In the meantime, President Trump is trying to at least evaluate the possibility to restart the economy as soon even as next week. He said yesterday in Twitter, we have to be careful that the cure is not worse than the situation itself. Also this morning he tweets that the people in the country wants to go back to work, and that is a big conflicting versions of what the president believes that could be the solution of this crisis, and some of his best advisors, and even Governor Cuomo, that says that you cannot put a price in order to save lives. In the meantime, here in Washington, the Congress is still debating the stimulus plan, about $2 trillion, in order to precisely help the most vulnerable people in the country, but also the huge corporations that mostly the country is at a full stop. And the case of the minority leader of the Senate, we're talking Charles Schumer, has mentioned that he believes that sometime today they could reach an agreement and propose the signing of the bill to the president. So far, this case is still very much a country totally still. At least 1/3 of the Americans are in their homes, and the closings are getting more strict. For example, in Puerto Rico, the order is that any person coming from any part of the world, the U.S. included, is going to be put in 14 days quarantine. The same thing said the governor of Florida. So the situation is very fluid. but the crisis is extremely grave.
We thank Jorge Gestoso for that report. Veteran Afro-jazz legend Manu Dibango died on Tuesday after a bout with the novel coronavirus. A post on his official Facebook page read, "It is with deep sadness that we announce the loss of Manu Dibango, who passed away on March 24th of 2020 at 86 years old, further to COVID-19.
He had a great hope for Africa, especially in terms of copyright, in terms of related rights. He had a great hope for Africa in terms of aesthetic innovation too, because that is what is most lacking today.
It's a huge loss. It happened at the moment we're confined. I myself am confined because it is the only way to fight this enemy, this terrorist called coronavirus.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesorenglish.net. And be sure to follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Until next time.
From here to beyond the South.